Welcome back to another video. In this video we will look at how to turn this boring cube into this awesome arc reactor.
Oh shit!
Let's start with it.
In this video I'm going to use Blender 2.92, which is the latest version of Blender. Don't worry if you are coming from a previous version, for example from Blender 2.83, which I've used in my previous videos. The workflows are still the same, the menus might look different. Personally, I'm using this version for the first time and it's really not a thing. Just like in my previous videos, here on the bottom right corner you can see my mouse and keyboard input. Now let's start with the base of the Arc Reactor. For that I will create a circle with Shift A. And we need to make sure that we have set the vertices to a high value. For example, 128. Because later we can't change this value anymore. And we want to make sure that we get a really round circle and not something like a hexagon. Then I go into edit mode and I make sure that my edge select is active. Then I select all edges by pressing A. And I press E to extrude and Z to extrude along the Z-axis. Like this. Now I will move it down a bit by pressing G and Z again. And I hold down Ctrl to set a fixed step size. Then I extrude again by pressing E and Z along the Z-axis. I hold down Ctrl and I scale it by pressing S. I extrude a third time by pressing E and Z. And that's it. Now I think I will make this a bit smaller. Just selected both circles by pressing Alt and Shift. And then I can move them by pressing G and Z like this. And we need to make sure that here this angle is smaller than 45 degrees. Because if it's larger than 45 degrees, we will need support structure, and that's what we don't want to have. Okay. Now the next step is we go back to object mode by pressing Tab, and then we add the solidify modifier to add thickness. We need to make sure that even thickness is activated, and we will make the thickness 0.1 like this. Then we go into wireframe mode, and this is how it looks like. I will make the modifier invisible again. Here on the top right you have two icons. One says real time, the other one render. And if you are clicking on it, then you will deactivate the preview of it. Because now I want to add a ground. I select my circle here again by pressing Alt and Shift, and I just press F. And if I now activate the preview again, that's what we get. I go to wireframe mode. Okay. And if I'm happy with that, I just press apply. This is slightly different in this version. Here on the top right, we have this arrow and we need to click on it and there we have our apply button. And for that, we need to be in the object mode. So I go into the object mode. I'm currently in the edit mode. And now I can apply it. Now I will adjust the inner walls a bit. It's easier if you go into solid mode. So I have selected my circles and I move them down a bit. Like this. And I hold Shift and Control again for a fixed step size. Okay, that's it. Now I will rename it to base. And we are finished with the first part of the Arc Reactor. Now we will continue with the second part, the outer circle, which looks like a fence somehow. For that I will make my base invisible. I change the perspective and I create a circle again. Now I can make my base object visible again and I go into wireframe mode. And I will make it a bit larger than the circle of the base object, larger than this circle here of the base object. Okay, now I go into edit mode. I make sure that edge select is active and I select all the edges and press E to extrude. I press right click and then I press S for scale. I hold down Control for a fixed step size. And then I press right click and I have extruded the edges, which will result in faces. Okay, now I go to face select. I hold down Shift and Alt, click on one of the faces and now all faces will be selected. I activate the base object again. Then I press E to extrude, Z to extrude along the Z axis. I hold down Control and I move my mouse up. Now I will go into wireframe mode to get a better view. And this is already the circle which we will need for this fence-like object. Now I make the base invisible again. And I will create another cube. And I will scale this cube down. Again with holding Control. And this cube should be as thick as this ring. Because later we want to merge this cube with the ring. Still a bit too big. And I will scale it down on the y-axis. Like this. And I will go into edit mode, select the top face and move the top face down a bit. Like this. Perfect. Okay. Now I will make the circle object invisible. I make the base object visible again. I select the cube. I go into edit mode, my top face is still selected. And I press E to extrude and Z for the Z-axis. And again, I hold down the control key. Now my top face is still selected and I press G and Y to move my face along the Y-axis. And I hold down the control key. Like this. Then I press E again to extrude and Z to extrude along the Z-axis. Okay, that's it. Now I make the base object invisible again. And I make my circle object visible again. And now we want to make copies of this cube. For that, we go into edit mode, we select all faces of it. We need to make sure that we are in face select. And by pressing A, we select all faces. Then we click on spin here on the top left. This blue line with those two circles and a plus in it will appear. And then we click on it. Now here in the top left, we have a small menu. We click on it. And the first thing we need to do is set the angle to 360. And we set the steps to 10. Perfect. Now I will rename these cubes to fans. And then I click on my circle object, add the boolean modifier. I make sure that the boolean modifier is set to union. And on the object, I select fence. And then I can make fence invisible. And there we got our outer object of the Arc Reactor. We are now finished with the second object of our Arc Reactor. Now we will continue with the top plate of the base. For that I will make both the base and the circle object visible again. And I will create a cylinder. And again, we need to make sure that the vertices are high enough. Here it's set to 128. I'm fine with that. And I go to wireframe mode. I scale it up. I hold down Control key and Shift to get an even smaller step size. And I make the cylinder as large as the outer object of this Arc Reactor. Now I will scale it down on the Z-axis. And I move it up a bit. Now I will rename this object to top plate. And now I can make the base and the circle object invisible again. I will create now a duplicate of this object by pressing Shift D. And then I press right click. The second object, this duplicate, I will rename it to hole. And then I will resize it by pressing S and hold down the Control key. And here. I resize it on the Z-axis. And I move it up a bit. Like this. Okay. I think I will need to make this top plate object a bit bigger on the Z-axis. Like this. Okay. And then the next step, I will create another cube. And with this cube, we will create the outer holes. I also rename it in outer holes. And I scale it down. Now we will need to make sure that the outer holes object and the hole object are on the same position on the Z-axis. Like this. And I will need to resize the outer holes object. I just go into edit mode, select the top face and press G to move it along the Z-axis. And I will need to resize it on the Y-axis and move it up on the Y-axis, like this. Now I go again into edit mode and select the spin tool on the bottom left, and I select all faces. Again, I need to make sure that the angle is set to 360. And that's it. Now we will add a boolean modifier to the whole object. And we select the outer holes object and set the boolean modifier to union. Now we can make the outer holes object invisible. And I will make the top plate object invisible. Then I go to solid mode. And then I make my top plate object visible again and add boolean modifier, which I set to difference. And then I can select my whole object. I make the whole object invisible. And there we have finished our third object for the Arc Reactor. And I think I will adjust the size of the outer holes a bit. Okay, that's it. Now we will continue with the fourth object, which somehow looks like a candle stand. This basically is a combination of multiple objects. We have here 4 circles. First we will create the inner circles. And I will create again a circle object. I make the base object visible again. And I go into wireframe mode. Then I select my circle. I call it inner circle. Scale it down. Like this. I go into edit mode. I make sure that add selection is activated. And I select all edges. press E to extrude, right click, S to scale, and I hold down Control. And there I have my circle. Make my base object invisible again, and I do this 2 more times. I think I will make each of them a bit thinner. And I select all of them and press Ctrl and J to join those objects. Now I select all faces of it. I make sure that I'm in face select. Then I press E and Z to extrude along the Z axis. Now I create a cube. I scale it down, move it up a bit. And this cube need to have the same height than those circles. Like this. Okay, before we continue with this cube, we will create a 4th circle, a 4th ring. And I make the top plate object visible again. Then I scale down this outer ring. I go into edit mode, make sure that edge select is active. I select everything with A, press E to extrude, right click and scale. Now in the next step, I will extrude the faces of the circle on the Z-axis. Now I make the top plate invisible again, and I can continue with the cube. Okay, now I go into edit mode, select all faces of this cube, select again my spin tool, set it to 360 degrees, and set the steps to 3. Now I select the inner circles and the outer circle. I press Ctrl J to join these objects. I will rename them to inner circles. And then I select them, add a boolean modifier. And first I will rename this cube to bars. Then I click on my inner circles object, select bars, and set the boolean modifier to union. I can make bars invisible again. Now we need to make some screw holes. For that, I will create a cylinder object. I make sure that it is set to 128 vertices. I make sure that its vertices is set to 128. Go into wireframe mode, and I scale the cylinder down. Then I go back to object mode. I move it up a bit. I go back into edit mode, select the top face, and move the top face a bit up. Like this. And in edit mode, I again use the spin tool and set it to 360 degree. But first I need to make sure that all the faces are selected, and then I can click on it. Okay. I just renamed those cylinders to screw holders. Then I click on bars. Oh, it's not bars anymore. It's inner circles object. And I add another boolean modifier. I select the screw holders as object. And I set this boolean modifier also to union. And then I make the screw holders object invisible. This is the most complicated object of this Arc Reactor, but we are nearly done with it. Now in the next step, we will make the top plate visible again. And we go to wireframe mode. Now I create another cube and scale it down. And this cube will now fit this part of the top plate. Just adjusting the size of the cube and move it to its correct position. Okay. This is how the cube should look like. Now we go into edit mode and we will use the loop cut tool by pressing Ctrl and R. And we scroll up to get 2 loop cuts. With left click, we apply them, and with right click, those cuts will be made in the middle. Then we press S and X to move them to the sides. And I hold Ctrl to get a fixed step size. like this. We will just select the object in object mode, press S and Y, and we will scale this object a bit down. And now we will select the faces on the sides, like this. And we will extrude them by pressing E. Now we can move them individually by using the scale tool on the y-axis, like this. And I will select the bottom faces of this cube and move them further to the bottom, so that they connect with the circle here. Okay, yeah. Now I will move this inner circles object so that it's on the same position than this cube. But because I haven't applied the boolean modifier yet, I will also need to move the objects of the boolean modifiers. So I will also need to move bars and screw holders. For that I will need to make them visible again. Where's the bars? Ah, okay. Bars, screw holders, and inner circles. And I press G and Z to move them up. Perfect. Okay, now I select the cube object again. I go into edit mode, select edge select, and I select these edges here on the top. Then I press G to move them and Z to move them along the Z axis. I make the top plate invisible again. And I will select my cube object, go into edit mode, make sure that I'm in face select, and then I select these faces here. And here. And extrude them and move them individually by using the scale tool and pressing Z. Like this. I will move it up a bit. And I select these edges here and move them down. And I also select these edges here and move them to the right. Like this. Now I go into edit mode, select all faces of it, and I use again the spin tool. Set it to 360 and the steps to 10. And that's it. I will rename this cube to coils. And now I can merge these coils with the inner circles object. For that, I select again my inner circles object, add a boolean modifier, select the coils object, and set it to union. Now I can make the coils invisible. This is the most complicated object of the Arc Reactor, and it's printable without support structures. Let's see what we have got until now. We have this inner circles object, we have the top plate, we have our circle and the base. This is how our Arc Reactor looks right now. And there is one last object we need to make. And for this last object, I go back into wireframe mode again, and I will create another circle. And scale this circle down. And again, I go into edit mode, select edge select, press E to extrude, right click, S for scale, and then I adjust it like this. And I will create a copy of this circle by pressing Shift and D, right click, and I scale it down. And I adjust the thickness of this circle. Like this. Okay, I select both circles, press Ctrl and J to merge them, to join them. And then I go into edit mode, select all faces with face select and A, and extrude them on the Z axis. I select now only the top faces of the inner circle by pressing Alt and Shift. It's better when you do that in the solid mode, like this. And I move it up a bit with G and Z, like this. I will rename it as to top circle. And now I create another box object, another cube object, scale it down, go into wireframe mode, move it up. And it needs to have the same thickness than this outer circle. Like this. And now I create again copies of it with the spin tool. For that I go into edit mode, make sure that all faces are selected, select my spin tool, create the copies, make sure that it's set to 360, and I set the steps to 3. I rename this object to thick bars. Okay, now I select the top circle, I add boolean modifier, I select my thick bars, make sure that it's set to union, and here. Then I make thick bars invisible. And there's one last thing we need to do. We need to create those holes on the outer circle. For that we will create another cube object. We scale it down. Move it up a bit. And we need to scale it down on the x-axis, like this. Now we press Ctrl A and apply scale. Then we go into edit mode, select the top face and the bottom face of this cube and press Ctrl B. And we scroll up to make it as round as possible. And then we just press left click. Now I will scale it on the x-axis a bit. And guess what? Now we go again into edit mode, select everything. Now first we will need to scale it up on the z-axis, like this. And we click on the spin tool again, set it to 360, and we set 30 steps. 30 is better. Okay. Now we need to select this object, go into edit mode, and press L. We hover over those objects. And then we just press delete and faces. Okay. Now I will rename this object to pills. And I select my circle object, my top circle object, create another boolean modifier on it, set it to difference, and select my pills. And I can make my pills object invisible. And in this scenario, we will set the boolean modifier to fast here. And then we are finished with the final object of the Arc Reactor. Now there's one last thing we need to do, and that's to create the screw holes. Okay, we will need to move all of those objects up. So pills, thick bars, and thick bars, where is it? Where is my top plate? Here. And my inner circles object. Now I can make pills and thick parts invisible again. Go back to solid mode. Fancy. Base and no, it was circle, right? Yeah. And we forgot to make the screw holders in the base object. We'll just activate the screw holders object again. And I will just make a copy of that. And rename it to screw holders base. Move it down. Scale it up on the Z-axis. And move it down. And then I click on my base object, add a boolean modifier and make sure that it's set to union. Then I select screw holders base and I can make the screw holder base object invisible again and also the screw holders object. I go back into solid mode and I make all finished objects visible again. Top circle, circle, and inner circles. Now we just need to make the holes for the screws through all objects. For that I go into wireframe mode. Okay, we can here see the screw holders. And I will again make a copy of the screw holders object. Now I will create an on object. And for that I create a sphere, no, not a sphere, a cylinder. Again, make sure that vertices is set to 128. Scale it down. Like this. Here you will need to try out which size is the best one for you. Just make sure that the thickness of the screw holders is not too thin, because then it will break if you screw in your screws. Now we will need to resize it on the Z-axis. Like this. And we will need to make a copy, 2 more copies of it, with the spin tool again. And only 3 steps. And I will call it screws. Now we will need to make a boolean modifier on each of these objects and set it to difference, and then we select the screws object. So boolean modifier, screws. Okay, then the next object, boolean modifier again, screws, and then the next object, boolean modifier and screws, and the final object, boolean modifier and screws. Now I make screws invisible, and then we should have, okay, first I will just now apply all the modifiers. First I will start with the base object. Okay, here I set it to fast. Okay, then here I don't need to apply it. Then the next object was top circle. No, it was top plate. Okay, here I also set it to fast. Then inner circles. Also set to fast. The top circle. Also set to fast. Why doesn't it work? Okay, here I will just apply the thick bars. Okay, this is weird. From my experience, this always happens or sometimes happens if you want to merge two objects with boolean modifier, which for example have the same height. You want to merge two objects, or you want to create a whole, and you have two objects which have completely different sizes, then the boolean modifier works perfectly. But for example, in this case, where this cube has the same height like the outer circle, something doesn't work well and can cause issues. This is really weird. I mean, why does it work here and not here? Ah, okay. Okay, I will fix this the hard way. Okay. This can happen because the geometry isn't really good. Because faces are on top of each other and at the same height. And this exactly creates this issue. So what I'm doing here is I merge the vertices by pressing M. And then I select the merge point. And this helps. Okay. But okay, we are done with it. And so we have now completed all our objects for the Arc Reactor. And I will make everything visible again. Circle, and not the screws. And here, this is our finished object, our finished Arc Reactor. You can download this Blender file, the link is in the description. And basically, you can use this now and 3D print it. Now I'm currently in shading mode in Blender. Just added some color to it. So this is our finished 3D model. And I will now export it as STL file. And look how it looks like in Cura. And check if everything is okay with the model. Now we select everything of it, what we can see here. And we go to File and Export and STL. Selection only is activated. Apply modifiers is also activated. And then you just hit Export STL. Now in Cura, we go to File and Open File. And here we select our STL file. Okay, it's very small, so we will need to adjust the scale in Blender. And we can also see a few issues here. The normals of this object, at least of these coils, they are flipped and we need to flip them back in Blender. So back in Blender, we just need to select the object. Okay, we select everything of it. We press Alt-N and we calculate outside. This should fix it. And we just can select everything again, press Export and STL. In Cura, we just hit right click and reload all models. Okay, perfect. Now it's fixed. And we go to export again, STL, and set scale to 10. And back in Cura, we just press right click and reload all models. Okay, perfect. Now we need to separate those objects and lay them flat on the surface. We will do that in Blender. For that, I will create copies of those objects and apply all modifiers. And I call it final. Then I select my top circle, create a copy of it, apply all the modifiers, rename it to final. Then the top plate, copy, apply, final. Inner circles is ready. Then the circles, apply, rename it with the final. And the base finally. Copy and final. and apply everything. Okay. Now I can just move everything around. And I will lay everything flat on the surface. Like this. Perfect. We select everything what we see in this scene. And press export again, file export STL, and export STL. Back in Cura, we do again a right click, we load all models, and there we have our final result. And everything seems to be okay. And we can also see the print time on the bottom right. Now we can see here that these faces are also red, which indicates that there you will need some support structure. But this is a bridge. And bridges don't need support structure to work. Okay, that's pretty much it. Now we've made this 3D model from ground up, but it's not really ready for printing. It will require some adjustments. For example, the size is way too small. You can also download the original Blender file, which contains the 3D model which I've shown at the beginning of the video. But I just want to warn you, it's a really messy file. But all the dimensions are correct and it will result in a successful 3D print. But you can make it yourself even easier and just download the STL file from my Thingiverse account. The link is in the description. Now about the coloring. I've just used a red copper wire and two types of spray paint, a golden one and a silver one. And I've used black PLA and transparent PLA. If you also want to have the animation, the code and the components is on my GitHub page. The link is also in the description. Okay, this was quite a lot and we are finally really finished. I hope you could learn something from this video. And as always, I will see you in the next video.